Hello again. So let's install or deploy the vCenter server inside this host. Before we do that, I power on the host ESXi with the number 10, but not the one that we use in the previous section. It's the one that we created at the beginner inside this laptop. If you remember, when we start installing the ESXi, we create a ESXi host inside this machine, this laptop, and then I move it to the other laptop and complete the course. But for this section that we're going to use the vCenter server appliance, I back to the ESXi that we created in the beginner, and of course I need to use this one from this laptop to have the ability to give to this ESXi host more than 10 gigabytes of RAM. The other laptop have a limit of 8 gigabytes of RAM, so I can't create the host ESXi with 10 gigabytes in the other laptop, so I use this one that I created at the beginner and I give it about 12 gigabytes of RAM, so I have more than 10 gigabytes of RAM free, because the installation of the vCenter server need at least 10 gigabytes of RAM. So we're going to use this ESXi host from this laptop to complete the installation of the vCenter. And as you will see here that we have 0 virtual machine. This host does not have any virtual machine. And through the installation, you will see that we have a new virtual machine right here. So if we back to our vCenter server ISO image, and we have the file that we extract from this ISO image, and we have two options to install the vCenter. The first one through the command line, as you will see here. If you have Linux, you open the one from Linux. If you have Macintosh or Windows, you choose the one from Windows. Of course, we're not going to use the command line, and we're going to use only the user interface to make it easy for you. So we get inside the vCenter server appliance user interface installer, and we chose the one that fits our operation system. In my case, I use Windows, so I will open Windows, and here the installer application to run the installation. So let's start the installation and follow the step. As you will see here, we have four options. If you remember, when we install the vCenter, we have only install and another option, but here we have four options. If we see the first option that's called install is to install a new vCenter server appliance or platform service controller appliance. This option will let us to install the vCenter server appliance for the first time. Then we have upgrade. If we already have a vCenter server appliance, for example, version 6 or version 5.5, and we want to upgrade it to the 6.5. Then we have migrate. That means if we need to migrate from an existing vCenter server for Windows to a vCenter server appliance. That means we already have a vCenter server inside our Windows and we want to move to the appliance. This option lets us to migrate all the information and the data from the vCenter server of the Windows to the new vCenter server appliance. Then we have the restore to restore from a preview created vCenter server appliance backup. If we have a backup and we want to restore the backup to the vCenter that we have. Of course, in our situation, we're going to use the first one. And as you will see here, we have two steps or two stages, stage 1 and stage 2. The first stage is to deploy the appliance. That means the appliance of the virtual machine that we have, the OVF right here, this one. This one, it will deploy it inside the virtual machine. Then the second stage is to set up the appliance, the configuration of the appliance that we'll need to use it, for example, the password, the user, etc. So let's start the first stage, deploy the appliance. Then we click next. Here our license. Of course, you should read this license and accept it. Next. Then we have the two options. The first one, as we do in the vCenter, the vCenter server with embedded platform service controller, and the second option with the external platform service controller. Of course, as I tell you, we can use this one if we have a small environment. if we have a large environment that need more resource, we need to use this second one. And of course, we should start with the platform, then we install the vCenter server appliance. Of course, in our situation, always we're going to use the first one because we just create a small lab. Next, then it asks us for the ESXi host or vCenter server name. That means you should give to this installation the ESXi host or the vCenter name or IP address to let them connect to that ESXi host and start deploy the virtual machine. Of course, as we don't have the DNS, so we can't use the FQDN, that means the domain name. So we're going to use the IP address of the host that we want to deploy this virtual machine inside it. Then you have the port 443. Of course, you should not change it. Then we need to give it the username and the password of this ESXi host, or if we work on the vCenter server, we need to give it the username and the password of the vCenter server. In our situation, we use the ESXi username and password. Then you click next. It will check the connection. Of course, give you that certificate warning. As always, when we try to connect to any ESXi host, it asks us for the certificate. We see yes, because we don't need the certificate in our lab. Then it asks you for the virtual machine name. In this situation, by default, give it VMware vCenter Server Appliance. Of course, we can customize it. For example, vCenter Server Appliance, just like that. For example, 6.5, just to know about this machine that is a vCenter Server Appliance. Then it asks us for the password of this virtual machine. That means a password for the operation system. So let's choose a complex password. Then we click next. Then it asks us to select the deployment size. If you remember in the previous video, we see how much CPU and memory need for any of the deployment size. If you remember, the Tiny have 2 CPU, 10 memory, and then how much storage and how much host can manage and how much virtual machine can manage. The small one, the medium, the large, and the X large. And we tell you that X large need an external database to manage 2000 hosts, and for the empty database of the vCenter server appliance can manage a large environment. So of course, in our situation, we going to use only the tiny. The storage size, we have the default, the large, and the X large. If you remember, when I show you a table about the storage necessary for the vCenter server, we have 3 columns of the storage. The first one is the default. That means for the default storage, we need only 215 gigabytes. For the large, we need 775 gigabytes. And for the X large, we need 1615 gigabytes. This in relation about how your storage want to use the default, the large, and the X large. Of course, we're going only to use the default because we have a limit hardware for the lab. We click next. Then it asks us for the data store. And an important step is to enable the 10 disk in our lab. Of course, in the real environment, it's not necessary to enable the 10 because you will have more than 2 or 3 terabytes in the storage of your host, and the vCenter server need in the default storage about 215 gigabytes, but in our lab we only have 14 gigabytes. If we try to click next, it will give us an error that insufficient disk space for take provision. It requires at least 215 gigabytes. In this case, to complete our lab, because we have only 14 gigabytes, we need to enable the 10 mode disk. This will let us to complete to the next step and create a virtual machine with a hard drive of 2010. This will let us to create the virtual machine with only 14 gigabytes of free space. So then we click next. So it's passed. Then it asks us for the VM network. We only have the VM network by default come with the VM network. The IP version 4 or 6, you can choose one of them. The IP is static or DHCP. If you choose DHCP, it automatically fund it. Let's just keep with the static. Then we need to give it a system name. This system name is like the name of the virtual machine in the operation system. To make it simple, is the same when we use wincenter.vmlab.ma. So this is the name that we use it before in the previous section about the vCenter server, is the same as this option right here, the system name. That means if we want to connect to this virtual machine, we need to use the domain name, call it wincenter vmlab.ma. Of course, you can customize it to what you want. For example, admin.vcenter. For example, local, etc. But of course, in our situation, we're not going to use because we don't have the DNS. Let's just follow the step and back to it later. Then we have the IP address for the host. Let's give it, for example, the 13 to make it simple. The subnet mask 255.255. So it gives you an error that the IP address admin vCenter server local is not resolved by this IP. That means we don't have any DNS. That's why we need to leave it empty. Let's just copy it. The default UI, you give it to default UI in your environment, and then the DNS server that is available. In this case, here you need to put the DNS server IP address that have this IP address mapped to this or assign it to this system name. You should already have this name assigned to this IP address in this DNS server. But in our case, we don't have the DNS server, so we don't have the ability to use the system name. So we'll keep it empty and it automatically will use the IP address right here. If we click right here, vCenter use the FQDN or IP address as the system name. If you leave the option FQDN file empty, the IP address will be used as the system name. The system name is encoded in the SSL certificate of the system. The components communicate with each other by using the name. So we leave it empty and it will automatically use the IP address. And of course, the DNS, we should have already a DNS server, so we can put it right here. So as this is just a tutorial to know how to do the installation, we don't need to have a DNS server now. So we click next. So it requires at least the DNS server. Let's put the DNS server of the router. Next. If you see, he automatically assigned the IP address to the system name right here. Here is it, the host that we're going to use to install this virtual machine, the name of the virtual machine, the deployment type, the deployment size, the data store, the VM network, and the configuration of the IP version 4. So we click finished and it will take about 30 to 40 minutes to deploy this virtual machine. So see you after 13 or 14 minutes.